Look, we have seen our share of foldable phones this year. There has been the Galaxy Fold, which continues to be on sale if that's your thing, and there's the Huawei Mate X, which is still inching along towards some launch date, which will hopefully happen at some point this year. But I've been using this. This is the Motorola Razr, and it's the first foldable phone I've used all year that actually kind of feels like it makes sense for regular people. And that's because it's exactly the weird kind of phone it is. It's not a phone that opens up into a small tablet. It's a really small thing that opens up into a normal sized phone. Let's take a closer look. Right off the bat, I have to gush a little bit. This is a really impressive technical feat, not just because Motorola took the classic Razr design and updated it with a foldable display, but because the hinge mechanism that drives this display, that makes it possible, feels really, really clever. When you open and close the phone, a bit of it actually extends down into this chin thing, which among other things houses the antenna. This is probably the most impressive foldable phone I've seen so far, if only because it seems to do the best job of making sure that it doesn't really feel like a foldable when it's open. There's a series of gears and plates that move back and forth as you open and close the phone, all of which make sure that the screen itself, feels like a perfectly normal smartphone screen when you're using it, but also ensures that it stays nice and protected when the phone is closed. And yeah, that's a big deal because there is no gap between the top and bottom of this phone when it's closed. If you took a regular plastic OLED display and folded it right in half, well, it would probably break right at that crease. But when the phone closes, it actually contorts the screen so it sort of takes on this teardrop shape. That prevents the screen from being damaged and keeps the phone nice and flush when it's shut. That should also theoretically mean that nothing is getting into and out of the crevices around this display, but I have my concerns. If you actually take a really close look while you're opening and closing this device, there is a bit of a gap that can appear, especially when you're closing this phone very slowly. You can see what I mean here. It's probably not going to be a huge deal in regular use, especially when you consider that that gap is hardly ever open if you're just opening and closing the phone quickly. But it is there, and it's one potential point of failure for a device that kind of doesn't seem to have too many. So yeah, it is a technical achievement, but let's talk about what this thing actually does, because for the most part, when the phone is open, it just acts like a smartphone. There are few frills to be found in the software. The software additions you will find are largely meant to define how this smaller external screen interact with this 6.2-inch big screen. All you can really do right now are manage your notifications, you can control your media, very lightweight tasks that Motorola has to specifically define. You can't just use apps on the secondary display. All of it really is tightly controlled by what Motorola and Google have set out for this device. Motorola says that in time, it will expand the amount of actions you can perform on this external screen. But for now, yeah, if you're looking at your email and checking your text messages, it's very easy to do on this display. And to actually respond to someone, all you have to do is open the phone. It picks you up right where you left off. And really, that's what I've come to appreciate about the Razr during my time with it. It's just enough phone to get through these little interactions when I don't need to open my phone, but when I do, I've got the ability to jump into a full smartphone-sized display and kind of get my stuff done. I prefer this, I think, to the sort of small tablet approach as seen with devices like the Galaxy Fold and the Mate X, but I think it's fair to say that this might not be the foldable that everyone is looking for. It's less ambitious in some ways, even though it does work probably better than any of the other foldables I've touched this year. The interactions with that second screen can feel a bit limited, but there's at least one interesting way that you can use it to your advantage, and that is when it's time to take selfies. If you give the phone the classic double crank, it'll activate that main camera, that 16 megapixel main camera, which we can now use for selfies. You can either tap the screen to take one smile, which sometimes works, or just use the volume keys. It's one of the more novel ways to use the secondary display, and it does seem to work quite well, but I want more out of this, and hopefully Motorola can deliver that in time. One of the most interesting things about the Razr so far is that Motorola says it didn't actually set out to build another Razr. This is just the foldable people told them they wanted. There are some really classic Razr design elements, like this chin, which, among other things, houses the fingerprint sensor, the USB Type-C port, and a set of bottom-firing speakers, which do get surprisingly loud, which they should, because there's no real speaker up here. There's not much in the way of stereo audio performance, but it sounds pretty good. I should also point out that this comes with 128 gigs of internal storage, but that is pretty much it. There is no micro SD slot for expandable storage, so you better hope that 128 gigs is all you're ever going to need. We're testing this thing in Los Angeles, and there hasn't been so much as a cloud in the sky all day. But if it did start raining, I'd feel a little more secure using the Razr than other foldables because it is coated with a nano coating that helps it deal with splashes and really quick interactions with water. It does not appear to be completely water resistant. You cannot and should not put this thing in a beer, but it's at least a bit hardier than what we've seen out of other foldables, and that's just nice to hear, honestly. There are a few other things to keep in mind, like the fact that this runs a Snapdragon 710 chipset with 6 gigs of RAM, which is perfectly fine. It's handled everything I've thrown at it without too much trouble at all, but it's definitely not a flagship device, which is pretty clear from the conversations I've had with everyone here. This is a design-first device. It's meant to look good, it's meant to feel good, and it's meant to run well, but it's not meant to blow the doors off of the competition when it comes to pure power. I also have my questions about battery life. Motorola says this thing will last for a full day off a single charge, and that may well be the case, but I do have to point out that the total combined capacity of the two batteries, one in each half of this device, that works out to a grand total of about 2,510 milliamp hours, which is quite a bit lower than what we've seen in most of the flagship smartphones we've tested this year. And again, this is a phone that's $1,500. You kind of want more than that out of the box. In fairness to Motorola, the quick view display on the outside is sort of designed to prevent you from having to open the phone all the time because you can do a lot of what you need right from this display. But because of the limited scope of these actions right now, which again involve managing your notifications and controlling your music, I don't know that that's going to be the case. I think the battery life might still be an issue because you're not using this external display as much as Moto thinks you will, but that could change in time. We also need to take a minute to talk about this camera. It's one camera on the front, which also works as the camera on the back, obviously. This is a 16 megapixel sensor with an f1.7 aperture. It takes pretty decent photos right off the bat, and it has a slew of AI optimizations to kind of help give it tools to react to different situations. So if you're shooting food, it'll activate a food mode. If you're shooting in the dark, it'll activate night mode. Things like that that are meant to make the process of using the camera much smoother. I will say, again, that for a $1,500 phone, I kind of do want a bit more ambition out of this camera, especially when Motorola is doing some truly weird, interesting stuff in the rest of its one devices. We've got, 3 or 4 cameras baked into one phone. We've got this single, solid 16 megapixel camera that is fine, but doesn't really do much to thrill. At the end of it all, the Motorola Razr is really one of those fascinating devices that appeals to me, even though a lot of the things that Motorola did here don't make the most amount of sense. I wish it had bigger batteries, I wish it had slightly higher resolution screens, I wish it had a more ambitious camera setup, but you get this. You get a phone that fits in your pocket really easily and gives you the ability to just hang up on people like the old days. There is a potent power in that you just don't get from a lot of other smartphones, especially other foldables. We'll obviously have to test the Motorola Razr for much longer than the time I've had to get a sense of whether this is the foldable for everybody. But in my early time with it, my gut kind of says yes. It is compromised, for sure. This is, by Motorola's own admission, a design-first phone, and there are shortcomings that come with that. But again, it does feel like the first foldable phone that might work for actual people, and there's a power in that kind of accessibility that we've just not seen out of the other foldables we've seen this year. So stay tuned for more as we continue to test this thing, and thanks for watching.